Um, Hello and welcome to Box to Board. And today we have got a bit of a treat. We are interviewing Stuart Mackaness from uh, Warcradle Studios and having a chat about some really exciting stuff. And yeah, so Stuart, I have to say the models that you guys have been releasing the last while have been absolutely bonkers. In terms of quality is just really, really good, and the range of stuff, the range of style, it's all got the same flavor. It's all got a flavor, but it's kind of like just there's such a diverse range there at the minute in Wild West Exodus. What just what's I don't know. Just the thing that blew me away was Only God Forgives, that posse. I'll put a picture of it up for people to look at, but it's just insanely good in terms of what you've got there. We talked earlier on about the fact that you've got a cerulean in the mix. It's just a great thing. So what kind of stuff's coming out of Wild West? I know the coronavirus is hitting everybody a little bit, but what's going on?
Yeah, so okay, so Exodus is in its it's now entering its third year. So it's gone really well. We had that first year where we're kind of settling things in and kind of moving from what was the when I say historical, the classic range, what was the existing range of miniatures.
Yeah.
And then kind of year two was building on that range, and so once we'd gotten them all back into production or tweaked them where we needed to, year two was about then kind of expanding on that. Year three very much is about kind of rounding the range out, and that's not to say that Wild West Exodus is coming to an end, but it's about that the game is now at a kind of a mature point, and we're now at a point where we're looking to bring in the final few releases that are kind of fleshing the existing factions out. Some of the factions are missing more options than others. So I think if you're an Outlaws player, you're pretty spoiled for choice in terms of releases. If you're a Watchers player or an Order player, you've only got a couple of sets really to choose from at the moment. There's lots of add-on sets, but the posse boxes and things is a bit thin on the ground. So we're addressing that in the next, I would have said 6 months, but that may tweak ever so slightly as with the current global situation. But certainly you can expect to see some exciting releases for both of those factions. Really, once those factions have had their releases, we'll continue to release things for Wild West Exodus. Of course we will, but really then we're starting to look more at what the next chapter is in that story, because if you're a Wild West Exodus player, the game as it was envisaged when it first came out, that is now what people can play. Yeah. There is the next stage, which is Lost World Exodus to a degree, because Lost World Exodus is the sister game to Wild West Exodus, but it's also about and I apologise if you hear beepings and things. Obviously, I'm working in the office, so I've still got various things rattling around.
Yeah.
The Wild West Exodus has a sister game, which is Lost World Exodus. Yes, it's a game in its own right. But what we're also doing is there will be things that will be coming out for Lost World Exodus that are designed to be played with or within Wild West Exodus. So there are some products and things, some miniatures that are conspicuously absent from the Wild West Exodus range, such as the Iron Horses, the bikes, the Interceptors, and stuff like that. That is absolutely coming. In plastic. But it will be coming as part of Lost World Exodus in kind of a dual branded thing where it'll be Wild West Exodus and Lost World Exodus, so you can use it, because Lost World Exodus has a whole bunch of new factions, but it is much more of a sort of squad-based units mass industrialized. It's the empires of the world battling against each other in this kind of far-flung, undiscovered land.
Yeah.
So because of that, it's a more natural fit for those kind of bits of kit to be in there. So
Yeah.
I suppose whereas the stereotypical, the archetypal Wild West Exodus game or scenario is like a bank heist or a shootout or something like that. Though, you know, mounted stuff, tanks and things don't really feature, although those things are out there in the Wild West setting. They're not they're a rarity rather than the kind of the standard fare. In Lost World Exodus, bikes, tanks, ranks and infantry is absolutely the main thing that you're going to be encountering. The kind of the little band of daring heroes is less of a Lost World Exodus thing. It's much more of a Wild West Exodus. So the two games will have their own feel. They're cross compatible, so they can play against each other. So you can have your daring band of Wild West Exodus heroes against a kind of a more kind of rank and file Lost World Exodus force, a detachment, and so on. But they within themselves they have their own feel, their own identity. They're not just carbon copies of each other. The slant of the game is of the two games is slightly different. So there are factions in both games, like the Union and the Enlightened, which are in Lost World Exodus and Wild West Exodus. The great thing there is that the Enlightened and the Union in Lost World Exodus play and feel very different to the Enlightened and the Union in Wild West Exodus. And actually, I could take a Lost World Exodus Union force, and you could take a Wild West Exodus Union force. We could play against each other in a kind of a bit of a, in either a tournament or in a kind of just a casual play situation. And we're using different tactics and we're using different units. And if there are models that are common to both, they're behaving differently in each of the armies. So there's, it really is quite an exciting opportunity, an exciting moment for fans of all kinds of skirmish games.
It's interesting because listening to you speak, one of the things that strikes me is that there's that Lost World Exodus is going to be like a massive thing whenever it hits full on. It's because it is effectively a game that you can pick up and play once you get the models with your Wild West Exodus. Kind of, the rules being a bit, you'll be able to play with people who pick up the different sets, and that makes it a really good club game actually.
So with the cross compatibility of the rules, I mean, when we do go to launch Lost World Exodus, we'll go into this in much more detail. But essentially, what will happen is, so if you're playing Wild West Exodus, you're going to use the Wild West Exodus rulebook. That's how you're going to play.
Yeah.
If you're playing Lost World Exodus, you're going to use the Lost World Exodus rulebook. Okay, and there'll be lots of similarities between the two rule books. I mean, they'll be laid out differently, and there's additional rules and things for Lost World Exodus compared to Wild West Exodus. There are also rules in Wild West Exodus that don't form part of the core rules of Lost World Exodus. They do play slightly differently, and the factions play very differently. But what you'll do is, when you do have these kind of crossover games between the two, you're just going to use the Lost World Exodus rulebook. The Wild West Exodus players, when they're playing a game against Lost World Exodus faction, both players will use the Lost World Exodus rulebook. You're not going to have two different rulebooks being used. You'll just use the one rulebook. And what will happen is, in the back of the Lost World Exodus rulebook is going to be an appendix and appendices with those additional rules, those additional things for playing Wild West Exodus. Those will be an inclusion at the back of the Lost World Exodus book, specifically to kind of cater for that kind of crossover. The reason we're doing that is because, for two reasons. One, it makes sense that both players have the same set of rules that they're playing with, and also because the reality of it is Lost World Exodus and Wild West Exodus, yes, they're sisters, but one sister is older than the other one.
Yeah.
By the time Lost World Exodus comes out, Wild West Exodus is going to be 4 years old, roughly.
Yeah.
Approximately. Yeah. Current pandemic aside, it'll be about 4 years old, the game will be. So, though digitally the rules have kind of been updated, and there will be some tweaks and some FAQs and whatnot, fundamentally that printed rule book isn't 100% where the game is in terms of the meta and so forth. So when we do Lost World Exodus, the core rules of the game will be updated from how they are in Wild West Exodus. And initially, there will be there will be some notable differences. It's only when we do a core rule book that actually there are some parts of the game that we can only ever address when we touch a core rule book.
Yeah.
Backs of cards and things, well, we can change them on a yearly basis, and we do. But the core rules of the game, we can't touch those really. We can do some explanations, some little FAQs, and some interactions and things. But aside from the odd errata, we can't wholesale week update the core of the game, except when we do a rule book. So Lost World Exodus' rule book, there is an opportunity there to overhaul the game engine and the common game engine between the two. But the reason why that then, if we do take that step, which is what we are doing, you then can't have two people playing with two different rule books, because actually the Exodus game engine in the Wild West Exodus book will be slightly out of step with the Lost World Exodus's version of that rules. So to avoid any kind of confusion or peculiarities, and also to stop Lost World Exodus having to be limited by always being 100% compatible with Wild West Exodus, we ensure that we say, okay, if you're going to play these kind of crossover games, which we encourage, which the game is designed for, use the Lost World Exodus rulebook with this like 2-page addendum which covers how bosses work, how faces work, and how hands work, because those 3 units don't exist in Lost World Exodus. So it effectively explains how they work. So you use that, and it's no problem. You're laughing. The Lost World Exodus is action and adventure decks are, and in fact, you'll see there's a new print of the action and adventure deck being done for Wild West Exodus, because we sold out of the existing one. So when that gets out there, they will notice that actually that deck will carry the logos of both games. So what you're going to see over the next 18 months is Lost World Exodus is going to slow. There's going to be this kind of this advanced guard, this advanced. So like there'll be some. So the card decks, anything that's a common component between the two, or any unit, anything being released that can be played within the two, is going to be coming out over the next 18 months. So that when Lost World Exodus finally arrives, actually there's a whole bunch of material already out there, and it gives half a chance when we launch the game. But actually, we launch the game and it feels like the game should be, rather than it being that we launch it with 2 or 3 little box sets, and actually for 6-12 months the game doesn't actually play how it's supposed to play, because there is a limit to how much we can bring out in any given release. So by kind of getting that in early and sort of updating the decks now, updating a few other bits and pieces now, it means that by the time we get there, if players haven't already picked up those bits and pieces, they can pick them up at the launch, and we're not flooding the market with 40, 50 products all in the same month, because that's how much stuff, that's the options that players will need to be able to choose from. Instead, we can do a kind of a more realistic release. But actually, if a player then jumps on board with Lost World Exodus, it's not just what came out in that release that they get to use. A whole bunch of other products that are Lost World Exodus products that have already been released, because they could also have been used for Wild West Exodus. Yeah, so it's a plan. We've been working on it for a little while, and we're now we're starting to see from last year we were releasing Lost World Exodus products, and yeah, you'll see more of this coming year.
Yeah, because looking at the Soul Hunters that were released, they're fantastic. I mean, that's an example. I would imagine that this is something you'll be able to use in both, and it's a kind of like a bridging, which is great. I mean, they're just awesome minis. I'll pop up a picture, but looking at the minis and looking at the rules within Wild West Exodus, they bring something a bit different, and that's good. Because that variety is one of the real strengths at the minute of Wild West Exodus. It is a mature game, so you've got so many options. You can play in so many different styles of play in so many different ways. I'm really encouraged actually hearing the way you're talking about Lost World, because it kind of feels as if that's something you want to. That feeling of depth in the game is really important as it goes forward, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So, what was the thing? Theodore Roosevelt. I have to talk about this, because this is the him riding a dinosaur just hit me like a sideways blast.
Technically, he's not riding a dinosaur. It looked like a dinosaur, and I'm sure in the dystopian age, people call them dinosaurs and so on. But technically, they're not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are creatures that lived millions of years ago and died out. And what you're seeing is the alien science that's going on far beneath the surface of Antarctica, which is obviously the people in the dystopian age don't understand it, but in the kind of for players, we do know. Effectively, it's terraforming. There's a terraforming engine. Is terraforming Antarctica. It's not intentionally. It's leaking. There's a malfunction in the crashed starship that's buried underneath Antarctica, and it is the terraforming equipment on board is leaking out, and it's causing the environment on the surface to be restructured. And fundamentally, how it works is, well, I'm not going to go into the technology of it because it's alien science and beyond my ken. But the effect is that it's like breaking, taking all the building blocks of life, and if you imagine that was depending on what your personal beliefs are, whether by plan or whether by random happenstance or whatever, but fundamentally the lines of evolution and development were set at some point through various rules. Now, what this has done is this has taken it back to that starting point, shaken it up, and given a new set of rules. So those creatures aren't dinosaurs because they're new. They're new creatures. You're not going to see. There are no Tyrannosauruses and Stegosaurus and Triceratops. None of those creatures are running around in Antarctica. But there are creatures that are, to the naked eye, very, very similar. Because that's how they've been rapidly evolved in a slightly different way.
Ecological niche is what they call it.
But they are still megasaurids. They're still massive lizard creatures. They are effectively dinosaurs, but they're but as I say, dinosaurs as a species were extinct, so they are whatever this new, like neo-dinosaurs or neosaurids. They're a new species. They're a new genus. So, but because it is the dystopian age and it's an alternate history, so actually a lot of the dinosaur discoveries that we've made in our world now, a lot of those haven't happened yet. So haven't discovered a lot of creatures. So there will be names and terms and things that will be applied to creatures in Lost World Exodus that might be very, very similar, or even might be the same as in our world. But obviously, that's it's the same as it's the same as Antarctica herself. So the land of Antarctica was discovered by this point in our real world. The continent had been discovered and was starting to be very tentatively explored, but the majority of the exploration of Antarctica in our world took place in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the early 1900s onwards was the proper exploration of the Antarctic. Well, obviously, that doesn't happen in the dystopian age. The dystopian age is in the late 1870s. So you can't have places that are named after kind of famous explorers, because those explorers haven't been born and they haven't found those places.
Yeah.
Instead, other people have found those places, because Antarctica is being explored and developed 50 years, 100 years earlier than happened in our world.
Yeah.
Antarctica that they're discovering and exploring and mapping and naming is a different Antarctica to the one that we have. So there are chasms and places and valleys, and which all have wonderful names, evocative names and things, but are like Terra Nova is one of the regions there.
Yeah.
Which actually is a term that they did use for Antarctica, for parts of Antarctica in our real world, but that fell out of favour because then people properly explored it and mapped it and did expeditions across it, and quite rightly they gave their own naming conventions for it. Well, that doesn't happen in the dystopian age, so Terra Nova is absolutely a large region of Antarctica is called Terra Nova. There are in the background to Roosevelt, which excuse me, I'm losing my voice. In the background to Roosevelt, you'll see there's which is available when we release units. We always do a background piece on a whole wealth of stuff. So it talks about like the Battle of Mount Erebus and things like that, which is a big volcano in Antarctica and stuff. So there's lots of some of these locations and these creatures, the Trodons, which is the giant lizard, the saurid that he's riding. It names them, it talks about them, and so on. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of this background, this kind of evocative stuff that you saw and kind of excited you. There's some depth to that as well, and hopefully people are going to be on board with that.
It's just that recurrent theme in this universe is the depth. The depth is just fantastic, and from that point of view, you just think, actually, it's a real world building. It just keeps developing and developing and enriching, and it makes the gaming experience that much more fun, to be honest. Because it's fundamentally grown-ups playing with little toy soldiers, and it's all about the imagination, and it's all about actually being creative and enjoying it. And there's just a sense of real joy in the game that I absolutely adore at the minute. And the stuff that's coming out. So time's running away with us. So I just want to say thank you. And I know that you guys are still plugging out. You're still sending out product, and you're still selling online. So
yeah, I mean, obviously our staff here is the most important thing for us to protect. So the majority of the company, Whaling Games, is shut down. Well, not shut down is the wrong word. That we're working remotely.
Yeah.
It's the only people, and obviously the government asked that online retail continue.
Yeah.
Which makes sense for lots of reasons. But there's a whole host of measures that we've had to put in place to make sure that our staff here are protected.
Yeah.
Our operations staff are all working remotely, so on the level in the building that I'm at, there isn't anybody else up here. It's just literally just me, which makes for I'm actually having quite productive days, which is quite good.
Yeah.
The door to my office is no longer like a revolving procession of people. But it means that our warehousing, our pick and packing team, our goods in teams, they're working in a very kind of separated and regimented way, just to make sure that they're protected. Which doesn't have a knock-on effect. It slows down our ability to do some things, but the important thing is that those things are still happening. So we're still getting deliveries coming in, we're still getting orders packed, and we're still getting stuff shipped out. So even though the Warcradle side of the business is kind of hibernating to a degree, so we're not manufacturing at the moment. We aren't assembling anything because that's not really essential stuff, and it's not. There was no safe way to protect our staff. There was no safe way to really do that.
Yeah.
So we shut those parts down. So our plastic injection department shut down. The resin casting is shut down. So the assembly, the laser cutting, the terrain building, all of that's all shut down. The retail store here is shut down. So the general public can't come in at all. And the studio, so the creative hub, the studio working either remotely or they're currently not working, because it just depends on how much of their job that they're able to do remotely. I believe Darren, the studio painter, he's sequestered himself away in his little painting studio at home, and he's pumping out all sorts of wonderful Mythos miniatures at the moment, so that's great. I know that Jim and Chris and some of the games design guys just pumping away on things. Obviously, playtesting is a challenge, but they've come up with some kind of online thing, which is a little bit beyond my my understanding. But there is some online collective playtesting thing that they can do, so that's fine. The sculptors have got their sculpting equipment at home, so they're again, it's at a more subdued rate, but they're still working on things. They can only do the first part of the process, because one of the strengths of Warcradle is that we have the concept artists, the designers, the rules writers, the sculptors, and the manufacturers are all in the same place. So what normally is that obviously the bit that we can still do, which is the concepts. So Roberto's still pumping concepts out and coming up with all sorts of amazing stuff, exciting stuff. I've just seen the Tinder list for Mythos, which are disturbing. But anyway, so he's still doing that, and the sculptors are then picking up that baton and then beginning the sculpting process. But they can only now take to having a 3D model. They can't.
Yeah.
Part of that process, the natural part of that process, is then to work with the manufacturing teams, work out if it's going into resin, work out where the cuts are going to go, and refine some details so that translates properly. Or if it's going into plastic, it's then laying that out on the tool and so on. None of that can happen. So when our manufacturing side does come back, when this situation is at an end, and God willing, it is over fairly soon. When they're back, they're going to have a mountain of stuff to then do that other half for. But yeah, so it's where you cut your cloth accordingly. You do what you can with the time you have. At the moment, we don't have I know Games Workshop have said that for a particular month there'll be no releases, and I totally understand why that would happen. With us, because of the way that we're structured, there will be some releases still. We don't have a month where there's nothing coming out at the moment that we're aware of. It just really does depend on how long this global situation. It's already delaying things. And in fact, the Dystopian Wars has been delayed. What was a small delay is looking like a more significant delay now, I would imagine. You'd be looking at the other side of summer, perhaps, before we see Dystopian Wars. Whereas Lost World Exodus has kind of gained another 6 months to its development cycle, and make the most out of the time that we've got to improve and to refine and what have you. But because of the way we're structured and we're so limited now, there is a limit actually to how much we can do meaningfully. So it's a balance.
But it goes without saying, stay safe and stay well, and it's really great to talk to you. Time's literally gone, but thanks for chatting to us today, and like I said, stay safe, stay well, and all the best to you and yours. Okay?
Yeah, to you. All right, take care.
Bye.